The first time I walked into Jacob Stoltzfus's washhouse outside Strasbourg, Lancaster County, in the middle of August, I expected a fan. What I found instead changed me. The air felt wrong for summer. It touched my arms like cellar stone. The room smelled like damp limestone, apples, and pine boards that had cooled all night. I heard buggy wheels on gravel outside. Inside, I heard nothing. No compressor, no vent motor, no rattling box in a window. Sunlight was pounding the yard hard enough to bleach the fence rails white, but the floor under my boots stayed cool, and the Crocs on the shelf held their chill. I stood there for 14 minutes looking for the machine. It wasn't there. And that's when I understood I'd been wrong about everything. I had spent years believing comfort came from equipment, bigger unit, bigger bill, bigger promise on the carton. Standing in that room, with butter holding firm and roots staying crisp, I realized the power source was already under my feet. The dirt was doing the work, quietly, constantly, free. I went back outside and put a probe into the shaded ground beside the wall. Then I checked the lane, the porch, the stone threshold, and the air near the vent opening under the bench. The lane was 91 degrees. The shaded soil 6 feet down was 55. The air coming through the low opening was 57. That was not a trick. It was stored energy, not stored in lithium, not stored in gasoline, stored in temperature difference, stored in mass, stored in the same ground you have probably walked across 1,000 times without ever being told it can carry part of your heating and cooling load for you. I've been going back to Lancaster County every autumn for 3 years, and every time I find something the building industry forgot on purpose. I'm going to show you how to turn the stable temperature under your yard into usable comfort with dirt, depth, and one simple buried path for air, 57 degrees. That is the outlet air I measured on an August afternoon when the lane outside sat at 91. And yes, this works even if your house was built 50 years ago, you live in a city, and you've never done this before. Stay with me. Because what I found in Lancaster County uses the same physics the Persians used to keep ice in desert heat 2,400 years ago. Here is the part nobody explains clearly. The ground is not cold. The ground is stable. The U.S. Energy Information Administration says the Earth 10 feet below ground stays between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit across much of the United States. That means winter air usually meets warmer soil below grade, and summer air usually meets cooler soil below grade. Heat always moves downhill, not downhill on a map, downhill across temperature. Hot chases cold until the gap narrows. If you send air through Earth that has been sitting at 54 to 56 degrees for months, the air starts surrendering its extremes to that soil. Think about a cast iron skillet after dinner. You kill the flame, but the pan keeps giving back what it stored. Soil works the same way, slower, bigger, far steadier. Your yard is not a fuel source, it is a thermal battery. The U.S. Department of Energy has said geothermal heat pumps reach 300 to 600% efficiency on the coldest winter nights. In the field, that is a coefficient of performance of 3 to 6. That means 3 to 6 units of heating or cooling moved for every 1 unit of input. Compare that with electric resistance heat at 1 to 1, or a typical gas furnace around 0.95 at the appliance. You are not building a full geothermal plant here. You are borrowing the same physics. The Earth holds the line. Your house rides that line. Natural resources. Canada's Earth-to-Air Exchanger Guide says tube depth, length, slope, and smooth interior wall all matter. It recommends at least 1.5 meters of cover to the top of the tube, with 30 to 40 meters of length giving real thermal performance. It also warns that humid air will condense in the pipe, and that a 2% slope and smooth wall tubing are critical. That is the science. Nothing mystical, nothing vague, just stable subsurface temperature, moving air, and controlled drainage. And that gap represents a massive market in equipment, refrigerant, replacement parts, and service every year. And that is why you have never heard of this. The first place I saw it used with real discipline was not in a lab. It was near Strasburg in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where the air goes quiet in a way most people have forgotten. I heard horses shifting in the lane. I heard a screen door. I did not hear machinery. I stepped from the sun into a low room beside the main house, and the temperature drop was immediate. My shirt stopped clinging to my back. The stone smelled damp but clean. The shelves held jars, crocks, and baskets, and the room stayed cool without a humming thing in sight. Jacob told me his father never said he was cooling a room. He said he was borrowing cellar air. That detail stayed with me. So did the way he laughed when I asked where the unit was. He pointed down, just down. He told me they had used some version of the same idea for 4 generations. Low rooms, banked walls, buried runs, spring-fed cooling when the site allowed it, stone where they could get it, shade where they could not. He traced it back to people who came through the Palatinate and Alsace, and to building habits that matched what families had carried from Canton Bern. That knowledge never disappeared. It was written out of the manual. It was waiting. You can see the larger historical pattern in Pennsylvania records. The Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission's Lancaster Plain study preserves a 1942 sociologist's observation that Plain families kept choosing labor-heavy, low-mechanized methods when those methods still worked. The Amish didn't read this in a textbook. They figured it out the way all real knowledge gets discovered, by paying attention to what the earth was already doing. If you think this began in Pennsylvania, you are still looking too late. In ancient Persia, builders pushed air through wind catchers and down toward Qanat-cooled spaces below grade, where moving water and shaded earth stripped heat from the air before it reached the room. They kept ice through desert summers because they understood that the ground could stabilize what the sky was trying to destroy. In Korea, Ondal took the same lesson in the opposite season. One fire charged a thick masonry floor, and the floor kept releasing that heat long after the flame had fallen back. Different climate, same answer. Use mass, use delay. Stop fighting the air directly. You can see echoes of it again in Roman subfloor systems, in Native American pit houses in the Southwest, and in medieval German cellars dug into banks of cool earth. Separate heat from comfort. Store what matters. Let time and mass do the expensive work. Every civilization that mastered extreme condition arrived at the same answer independently. The Amish never forgot. They carried it from Canton Bern and the Palatinate to Pennsylvania 280 years ago and kept building it because it worked and because they never needed anyone's permission to do what made sense. Here is where the anger starts. In 1929, Carrier Engineering made a choice that shaped the next century. It stopped treating mechanical cooling as a specialty answer for industrial humidity and started selling comfort itself as a product. The protected asset was not just a machine. It was a future of compressors, ducts, filters, refrigerant, and service calls. A house that could shave 20 to 30 degrees off intake air with buried pipe and earth mass threatened that future in plain dollar terms. Not because it failed, because compressors, tonnage, and recurring maintenance were more profitable. The lockout happened through paperwork, financing, and standards. In the 1936 Federal Housing Administration Underwriting Manual, mortgage-worthy houses were defined through appropriate and necessary utilities and conveniences installed. In 1940, the Rural Electrification Administration was circulating planning your farmstead wiring and lighting and training rural families around appliance-based living. The words sound harmless. The effect was not. Once financing, inspection, and marketing all revolved around purchased energy, the passive answer became professionally invisible. You could finance a bigger system. You could insure listed equipment. You could bill service, but you could not invoice the earth for quietly doing its job. Nobody told you, not your builder, not your contractor, not the man who sold you a bigger unit. Carrier bought the dream in print. Home magazines sold that dream back to you as modern life. The Federal Housing Administration ensured the standardized house. Utilities sold the monthly power. Later, trade groups protected the same model inside the codebooks. Different decade, same register. An entire field of knowledge disappeared from architecture schools and building codes. Not because it failed, because it wasn't profitable. And the continuation is not hidden if you look. In 2019, local officials voting through the International Code Council backed stronger efficiency measures in the Model Energy Code. Then, the National Association of Home Builders and the American Gas Association appealed 25 approved measures. In 2021, the ICC board eliminated governmental voting from the final energy code process after pressure led mainly by home builders and fossil fuel interests, according to the Institute for Market Transformation. That was not about better physics, it was about control. A looser base code protects oversized installs, slower change, more gas hookups, and more equipment sold into every subdivision. The U.S. HVAC market alone has been valued in the tens of billions annually. One recent U.S. market estimate put it at $31.26 billion. Every passive system built is tonnage that never gets sold, serviced, or replaced. Now, if you already own a house and you're thinking this only applies to people with land, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. You don't need to tear up your foundation, rip out your existing system, or buy equipment. You need a yard and a weekend. If you want to prove this to yourself, do not start with a fantasy. Start with one buried run. Start with temperature. Start where the soil stays damp and shaded longest. I would cut one trench 34 feet long, 18 inches wide, and 6 feet deep along the north or east side of the yard. That depth matters. At that line, you are finally borrowing the stable layer instead of the daily weather. If your frost line or local code pushes you deeper, go deeper. Into that trench, I would set one 4-inch smooth wall schedule 40 PVC run or a smooth wall HDPE tube if that is cheaper in your area. I would give that pipe a full 2% slope away from the house. Over 34 feet, that means roughly 8 inches of fall from high end to low end. That slope is your insurance policy. Bed the pipe in 3 inches of washed gravel. Seal every joint with primer and cement if you use PVC. At the low end, set a clean-out tee and a simple gravel sump or dry well bucket. At the house end, bring the outlet up through a basement insert, crawlspace panel, shed wall, or a removable window board sealed with closed cell foam. At the intake end, bring the tube up in a long sweep, not a hard choke point, and finish it 18 to 24 inches above grade. Cap it with stainless steel insect screen under a simple rain hood. I like the hood to project at least 4 inches past the opening. You are building an airway, not a critter condo. Smooth wall pipe is not optional. Corrugated drain tile causes standing moisture and mold, natural resources. Canada says ribbed pipe holds condensate even on a slope, and that is exactly how people build a swamp under their own house. Do not do it. Use smooth wall. Give water somewhere to go. Keep the air path cleanable. If you want the cheap proof first, you can test the principle for $8 to $14. Buy a short 4-inch PVC stub, 2 cheap dial thermometers, and 1 elbow. Push the stub 3 feet into damp shaded soil for a same-day comparison. Noon air at one end, outlet air at the other. You will not get full house performance. You will get belief. Then do the permanent version. 30 to 40 feet is the sweet spot for a backyard retrofit. Less than 10 feet is mostly a conversation piece. More than 70 feet gives diminishing returns for the digging unless you are building something much larger. Keep the run at least 5 feet from sewer lines and at least 10 feet from anything you cannot afford to disturb. If your site stays wet, add a 5-gallon drainage bucket at the low end with 1/2-inch gravel beneath it. If your soil is heavy clay, that gravel bed matters even more. If your site is radon prone, keep the system sealed and do not use perforated pipe. The air belongs in the tube, nowhere else. One Saturday morning gets you the test. 2 weekends gets the permanent run buried cleanly. 1 weekend for trenching and pipe. 1 for sealing, backfill, hood, and outlet finishing. When you backfill, start with another 3 inches of gravel over the tube. Then use native soil. Tamp in lifts. Do not crush the line with a loader bucket because you got impatient. Patience is cheaper than rebuilding. On a 95-degree day, when your outside air is sitting above 90 and your soil is holding 54 to 56, this setup will usually hand you intake air around 64 to 68 degrees before it reaches the room. Not frozen air, useful air, honest air, the kind that takes a house edge off fast. In January, the same run tempers incoming air upward before it ever hits your living space. That means less shock, less draft, and less work for whatever backup system you already own. You are not replacing every machine on day one. You are cutting the extremes before they hit you. Check the screen every spring. Flush the cleanout once a year. If you built the slope right, that is usually enough. PVC or HDPE underground will easily outlast the cheap appliances you keep replacing. Your window unit costs $179 to $429 to install, $18 to $46 per month to run in hot weather, and lasts 8 to 12 years before it ends up in a landfill. This costs $186 to $312 total. It lasts 20 to 30 years. Your choice. And once you feel that first cool pull of earth-tempered air coming through a tube you buried yourself, something changes. You stop thinking like a customer. You start thinking like a steward. That is the part they cannot sell back to you. Everything I've covered across this channel, root cellar cooling, lime wash walls, rain barrel pressure, I've put it all in one place, step by step, season by season, room by room, in the order the families actually use it. The link is in the description. But stay here, because what Jacob built under that floor is the part nobody is talking about yet. The buried run was only half of it. The rest was layout, low intake, high relief vent, thick wall where the sun hits hardest, shade where afternoon heat gets vicious. He was not using one trick. He was stacking small truths. That is how old systems beat modern ones. Not with magic, with layers. You can do the same thing. Give the earth the first pass, give shade the second, give mass the third, then let your existing system handle what is left. The bill drops because the fight got smaller before the machine ever woke up. If you're the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do. Hit subscribe. Not for me. For what comes next. Because this is not a channel. This is a quiet movement of people who have decided they're done being sold what they already own. I want to hear from you. Drop your state, your worst summer power bill, and whether your family ever had a spring house or cellar in the comments. I read every single one, and your answers decide what we cover next. Next week, I'm going to show you what a 1946 Penn State document reveals about old wall finishes and why some houses stayed cooler and drier before drywall and plastic paint took over. The technique uses nothing but hydrated lime, sand, and burlap, and the report from 1946 that proves a major university knew about it decades before telling you. You're not going to want to miss that one.